When Jesus went with him to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to sorrowful and be troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for a third time, saying the words again. And then he came to his disciples and said to him, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." You can have a seat.
Our lives are made up of two extremes. There's the great moments that we love, and there are different and difficult moments along the way. But these things are really important because these moments, the good, the greats, and the very difficult, are the ones that we tell in our family gatherings, aren't they? They're the ones we tell our friends of, can you believe this happened? Or do you remember the time that this happened? These are the stories that when you sat at the feet of your grandparents, they were the ones that told you. And these are the ones that you're like, "Grandpa, Grandma, tell me about a time when you were younger." And these, the good moments, the difficult moments, are the ones that they share. And if you remember whenever you were in grade school and they actually passed out history books to all of you and you flipped through those pages, those were just the highlights of history. They weren't the little conversations, they weren't the boring parts, they weren't the long parts, the long times in between. You really just read the highlights of things that changed the course of history. Even in our movies that we have along the way, we would get really bored if the majority of the movie was the hard work of the individual before the real action happened. Like the lead up to something. If the lead up to the big action point of the movie took the majority of the movie, nobody would go see the movie. It would get terrible reviews, nobody would go see it. See, Top Gun is one of my favorite movies, and I think the majority of you guys have seen this movie. This movie is about a Navy pilot trying to become the best pilot in his graduating class. And if you've seen the movie before, you will realize that the actual training part of becoming a pilot is pretty much nowhere to be seen in the movie. I think the movie's an hour and 15 minutes long, and maybe 8 minutes of that movie, maybe even less than that, was them training to show, like, this is how we become great pilots. And even genres like rom-coms, and we're getting close, so Christmas, I'll throw it in there too. Hallmark movies, they're the worst. Like, I'm sorry. They make you feel like you can fall in love in an hour, which is just unrealistic. You basically have two people that bump into each other. It's always by accident, always. And they go on a date, and they go on this great adventure, and it's amazing. And then they have a miscommunication. And then they hate each other for like 10 minutes. And then they come up and they make up, and it's all great at the end. But what they don't show you is the really hateful comments, the sass, the long text messages between the two, the mental gymnastics of dating and falling in love, and probably counseling as well. Basically, they put all of that into 10 minutes of them just kind of frustrated or hating each other. The reason why is because nobody would pay money to see that. Instead, we just turn on our TVs and watch reality TV, which is the exact same thing. And I think that owns its own sermon, so we're just going to move on from there. But when it comes to our faith, these great moments that we have in our life, these great faith-filled moments where you feel like you are just right there at heaven's door, are just as important as the really difficult ones in your life. They both have the ability to transform you into the person of Christ. So no matter what's going on, you can become Christ in that moment. Not just the good, but also the bad. The story that Drew just read a little earlier is a story of a mountaintop experience. And in this story in Matthew 26, this is actually the second mountain that Jesus has been on when he brought other people with him. If you try to remember with us, we've been in Matthew for a long time, but if you go back to Matthew chapter 17, that was the first time that Jesus brought a couple disciples onto a mountaintop. He brought 3 disciples, the same ones that he brought in this story, Peter, James, and John, and this mountaintop was Mount Tabor. He went up there to pray, and he's like, I'm going to bring my favorite disciples along with me. And when he got up there was a bright cloud that covered all of them at the top of this mountain. And appeared was Moses and Elijah, 2 of the greatest and most distinguished prophets of the Old Testament. And after just the amaze of seeing those 2 prophets being appeared in front of Jesus, a loud cry from heaven declared to Jesus that this is my son, who I am well pleased. Listen to him. And Peter was extremely excited that he goes and he tries to find tent material to build 3 tents for not only the 2 prophets that appeared in front of him, but also Jesus and the other 2 disciples, because he never wanted this moment of heaven to stop. So if you fast forward to the end of Matthew where we're at, there's another mountaintop story. And these stories start off the exact same way. Jesus is in the final day of his life, and he goes up onto another mount called Mount of Olives. And on that mountain, there's a little garden on the side of it called Gethsemane. This is located just walking distance from Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, which is where they've been for the entire week of Passover. And if you read the other Gospels, you might realize that Jesus doesn't just go here the one time like it kind of mentions in Matthew. He's actually gone there every single night to pray during this Passover week. And on the Mount of, and this is where our story starts. Jesus goes up the mountain and takes the exact same 3 disciples. We see Peter, James, and John, and for them, they probably thought like, ooh, something awesome is going to happen once again. But instead, they are greeted by the words of God. Instead of greeted by the words of God and the 2 prophets, they are greeted with Jesus becoming overwhelmed with the situation. It says that he was overwhelmed with grief to the point of death. And he turns to his 3 disciples and he tells them that his soul is very sorrowful, and asks them to remain there and to watch. And this is not the same Jesus that they have seen up to this point. Up to this point, Jesus has handled everything wonderfully. Every town that he walks into, even as he is praying, he answers prayers. He's going to the poor, he's feeding them. He fed 5,000 people. He wasn't worried about that whatsoever. He goes and he touches people with diseases like leprosy, and he heals them. The great Lord that they have been following around for 3 years, their hero, has always performed. But instead they are greeted with a raw emotion where he asks God, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. And then there's a pause. And he says, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. The cup is a common phrase that you might hear throughout the Bible, and that is a sign that is commonly used as judgment or just life. That this is the cup that has been given to you is a common phrase of that day. And maybe a phrase that we would use in our modern day is we would say like, well, this is the hand that you've been dealt. This is what life has given you. This is the hand. So Jesus does something profound here. He knows what's going to happen, that death is just around the corner in just a couple hours. But he goes to the Father in his pain. He doesn't run. He doesn't complain. He doesn't run and is quiet or doesn't talk to his people. He goes directly to the Father. But then, through all the pain, his default is to do what his Father wants. Shortly after that, Jesus returns to his disciples to see if they had been praying with him the entire time, but he finds them asleep, and this is what he says to them. And he came to his disciples and found them asleep, and he said to Peter, "So you could not watch me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." In this moment, we kind of see that there's two different directions that you can go to when you are experiencing deep suffering in your life. You can go the way of Jesus, and you can sit with God in your pain. You know what is coming, and you go with your best friends to go before the Father in prayer to figure it out. Or you can go down the path of the disciples, which is escapism. They know what's coming. He has told them what is coming. And when they're experiencing pain, some people, like they did, they literally just fall asleep. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to face it. And they spend a significant time just going right back to sleep. Some people go to eating. Some people go to drinking. Some people use their phone, and they just scroll on their phone, and there is a great correlation between screen time and the amount of pain that you're experiencing in your life. Some just want to go on vacation and run away. But Jesus goes back, after addressing them, goes right back to prayer, and you see the fruit of his prayers. He says, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And this is amazing. When Jesus doesn't get what he wants with his body, even though he's exhausted, he is frustrated, he knows he's going to die, his body is literally freaking out, he still leans on the obedience of God. And before they knew it, Jesus is back right with the disciples, telling them prayer time is over, and he has to be handed over to be killed. So in this story, it is clear that Jesus wants to teach his disciples something. He brought them up to the mountaintop, and when something amazing happens, but this time, it's hard, it's awkward, it's scary. And right in the middle of the text, we see this. This is what Jesus said. "So could you not watch me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Jesus wanted them to experience the strengthening of the spirit so they would not fall into temptation of what was going to happen next. See, life is real easy when you feel the spirit in worship or when you have a good biblical conversation with somebody. Life is real easy when your finances are in order, or when you feel connected to your spouse. Life is real easy when your kids listen to everything you say and they're not doing something stupid. Life is real easy when your job is going well. And life is real easy when there's no sickness or death. So when devastation is on the horizon, what do you do? When devastation is on the horizon, how do you act? Here's how it plays out for the disciples. When Jesus was arrested, right after this, he goes and it's handed over, and he says, "This is the will of my Father." He tells everybody that. Whenever he is put into handcuffs and he is going away, Peter, one of the disciples that were with him, jumps up, takes out a knife, and slices off the ear of one of the guards. And shortly after that, instantly, all the disciples that were not one of the three disperse, and they are no longer a part of the story until the very end. They are nowhere to be seen. Peter was the only one that slowly followed behind the guards and with his Lord Savior, Jesus Christ. But immediately, when he's walking through one of the courtyards following Jesus, it says that a servant girl, it wasn't an adult, it makes it sound like it was a small child servant girl, follows up to Peter and says, "Hey, were you one that were following Jesus?" And he immediately denies it and says, "I do not know this man." He goes a little bit further across the courtyard, and another servant girl, a child, comes up to Peter and says, "Aren't you the one that was following Jesus?" And he immediately denies once again that he was a follower of Jesus. He goes a little bit further, and then another man comes up to him and he says, "Aren't you the one that has been following Jesus?" And the scriptures say that he starts to curse the name and then says, "No, I do not know that man." The other two disciples, James and John, were nowhere to be seen because it alludes that they went back to their old jobs. So the three men, his best buddies, that he took up to pray with him on the mountaintop, where they fell asleep, where they weren't supposed to fall into temptation, they didn't even stick around long enough to bury their best friend into a tomb. When it comes time to prayer, for prayer, there seems to be a great correlation between our devotion and our response in hard times. The great mistake in Christian faith is that if you believe in Jesus, then everything will be fixed. As a pastor, I have walked through with people that have fell into temptation, head first into temptation when things were going wrong. I've walked with people as they became angry and bitter, and they decided to lash out with their closest friends. And I've also walked with people that went through equally frustration in their life. And even though they were sad and hurt and angry, they were still able to walk through that time of suffering without falling off the track. They still maintained friendships and showed love. They continued to stay faithful to the church, to serve, and they continued their life, even though there was pain. The reason is because Jesus, faith, salvation, wasn't just something in their mind that they were trying to live by, but they did the hard work to get the ideas that were in their head down into their heart. Or what I've said before, they did the hard work to get it from their head into their bones, into their DNA. It became who they are. It wasn't something that was just fleeting like a memory or something in their mind. It became a part of everyday life of who they were. For Jesus, prayer has always been the avenue in which he connected to the Father, and then right after that was given the strength to go through whatever life threw at him next. Through honest prayer, Jesus became the person that would lay down his life for his friends. See, I believe Jesus wanted his disciples to come up to that mountaintop with him to do the hard work of prayer, to see what the power of prayer could do for somebody. And it's so obvious to see that Jesus prayed, he had confidence in God, and he was able to get through anything. And the disciples didn't pray, and they relied on their own strength, and we see where that got them. Jesus did say, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." The way that the most of us live our lives is we praise Jesus when things are going well. And then when tough times happen, we decide to rely on our own strength. Or what Jesus said, the flesh. Now, sometimes we get through it. Sometimes. And even if we did get through it, because of how difficult it was relying on our own strength, that hardship or whatever just lingers on for weeks or months and sometimes even years. And whenever I go to those people and I ask, for whatever reason, "Hey, did you pray during this situation?" I get the same response every single time, which is, "I did not want to." It's because the flesh is weak. But there is good news. There is great news. The Spirit is willing. I have had great opportunity in my life to sit and meet amazing people of faith across denominational lines, young and old in my life. And I've also had many opportunities to sit down with some of these great leaders and great pastors in my time. And after some small talk, I always get right to the point as fast as possible, which is, how did you grow your church? Or if it's a great leader, how did you become the leader? How did you know what to do next? Or I'd ask any of those questions, like I'm trying to find some specific answer. And I remember just sitting there always, or if it's a preacher, I'm like, how did you know what to preach about next, then for the following year? And I'm sitting there and I always have a pad and paper and I'm like leaned over, like all of my attention is just wanting to know what this person is going to say. And I get the exact same answer every single time. And they say, constant prayer. Constant prayer. And I'm the dumb one that every time I go to a new leader, I go and I try to ask those same questions over and over as though there's some sort of hack in order to expand the kingdom of God. But I get the exact same answer. Prayer. What I realized and what I believe Jesus is teaching us, and if you need to, write this down. This is our main point for today. Prayer is not preparation for great work. It is the great work. I'm going to say this again. Prayer is not preparation for the great work. Prayer is the great work. Let me explain. We have all done some sort of training in our life, whether it's for job or sport. I mean, we've all had some training where you didn't know anything and then you knew something, and there's the path to get to that place. In different jobs, it takes different amount of time. Me and my son had been talking about sports recently, which is a great joy in my life because he's been running and making fun of me since he was, a newborn. And eventually, they always get the TV. I don't get to watch my sports on TV. I watch them on my iPad. Like I sit at the table and I post up. But little after little, Christopher, my 5-year-old, has been jumping on my lap and asking what I'm watching, which is like wonderful. And I say, well, football, and I try to explain a little thing, and it lasts like a minute and a half, like 90 seconds. And he's like, this is boring. And he goes and he goes and plays with his toys. But we're getting somewhere. I really appreciate it. But last week, we were running around in the backyard with our dog, and I picked up one of the dog tennis balls, and I threw it across the yard. And I guess the dog didn't see me, but it kind of landed at my son's feet. And he runs over, and he grabs it, and I said, son, throw me the ball. And he immediately, he has the ball in his hand, and instead of bringing the ball up, he brings it down to like under toss it to me. But when he did that, he didn't let go. So he threw it up and kind of backwards, and it landed right behind him. And he reacted the exact way that you would think a 5-year-old would react. He fell on the ground and said, I cannot do it. And now I've played baseball my entire life. I stopped at some point. I don't play baseball anymore. But I played through my life, all the way through college. And if you throw me a ball, even though I haven't played that sport in a long time, if you throw me a ball, I will immediately catch it with 2 hands. I will transfer it to the hand that I throw with, and I will be able to throw the ball directly to you. And I can do all of that without thinking. So I walked over to him, and I placed the ball in his right hand, and I put it up where it needs to be. I took a couple steps back, and I said, okay, when you throw it, take a step with your left foot, the opposite of your hand, and when you do that, bring your arm forward and let go of the ball. And when he did that, he launched the ball over my head, and it drilled the fence behind me. And when the ball made a loud noise off of the wooden fence, you should have seen the smile and the glow from his face of delight all over him. He threw the ball probably 40 feet the very first time that he threw this ball. And then over the next, it seemed like an hour, it was just he wanted to do it over and over and over again. But the moment that was the biggest joy for me was the very last time before he got bored, which it probably was like 90 seconds. It felt like an hour because it was so much joy to me. There was a moment where he threw the ball over my head once again, because I think he thought it was funny. And a core great memories of my life just came before me. I remember the young age of when I was 3, 4, and 5 doing the exact same thing with my dad. Him sitting on the bucket, me throwing it over his head, and then I have to go get it. That's the way. And then shortly afterwards, going to T-ball for the very first time in Gardenside at Cardinal Hill, or at Wolf Run. And then moving over to Cardinal Hill to do T-ball in Little Leagues, and then over to Shiloh Park. I remember the coaches hitting ground balls at me over and over and over again, where balls would bounce and hit me in the shin, in the chest, in the arms, sometimes the face. I remember the pop flies of over and over and over again. And I remember the late games and the practices and the private coach. I remembered it all in that moment of things that I thought I'd forgotten. And then I remembered the very first time I went up to bat in my very first college career match. I had 2 strikes, 2 balls, and the pitcher throws an inside fastball, and I somehow got around the ball and hit it just right over his head into the outfield. And I was excited. And I ran to first base, and I gave my coach a high five. And the game, and I realized in that moment, the game, that was not work. The work was the 14 years of practice, of games, of t-ball, minor leagues, little league, all the way up into college. Whenever I was at that batting stance in college for the very first time, I was not thinking of what I was supposed to do. It was so ingrained in my body that when the ball came over the plate, my body just knew what to do. But even greater, when my son said, "I want to learn how to throw a ball," I knew exactly what to do, where his arm placement should be, how he should hold the ball, how he should step. See, we love Jesus' miracle stories. The turning water into wine, feeding the 5,000, healing the sick. We love his teaching stories like Sermon on the Mount, we love Jesus on the cross. But if you look in between the lines, those were the great moments. Jesus prayed before feeding the 5,000. Jesus prayed while he was in the desert for 40 days. Jesus would often slip away, and Jesus would send his disciples ahead of him so he could sit back and pray. Before turning water into wine, he prayed. He prayed so much, and whenever he prayed, cool stuff happens, and that happened so often that his disciples actually pulled him aside and said, "Hey, teach us how to pray like you." Jesus spent his entire life praying, so when the guard came into that garden to arrest him, he freely went to the cross. Prayer was how he got God's stuff from his mind into his heart. Prayer was how he got to the point of obedience. Prayer got him to the place that whenever something happened discouraging in his life, like the guards coming, he just knew what to do because he did the hard work. Richard Foster said this. He said, "In prayer, real prayer, we begin to think God's thoughts after him. We desire the things he desires, to love the things he loves, to will the things he wills. Progressively, we are taught to see from his point of view." This year, Drew mentioned this a couple weeks ago, has been a difficult one so far. We have seen countries go at war. We've seen senseless murders and shootings. We've seen stabbings. There was a Mormon church that was shot up and burnt to the ground not too long ago by some maniac. And the most frustrating thing that I've seen when I'm watching TV or I go on social media, which is just a mistake on my part, but the most frustrating thing that I see is government officials and people on Facebook mocking, saying, "Well, I'm glad you had your thoughts and prayers." And they sit there on their moral high ground, and they actually have the legal ability to make things better, and they don't do anything. And the reason is because they do not pray. They don't realize that the only reason people get off the couch and start doing good, they don't realize that when people start taking care of their neighbor or start doing kingdom work, and they don't realize that every not-for-profit that has ever started was because something bad happened and somebody prayed and said, God, what do you want me to do? In the early church, they did the exact same thing. Acts 2:42, we read it last week. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayers. They devoted themselves to prayers. And then immediately after that, this is what it said, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and just distributing the proceeds to all who had need. And people say, how did they get to the point where they got off their couch or chairs or out of their house where they looked at their neighbor and said, you need something, I'm going to pray and I'm going to sell and I'm going to help you out. How do you get to that point? You pray. You get the stuff out of your head and it gets into your heart and you cannot help but do something. So if anybody says that prayers are not good enough, that is ridiculous. If we have a country that stops praying, we will stop doing everything. We will do nothing. So my question for our church: are you willing to do the hard work? Are you willing to do the great work? Is a better question. Do we want to make an impact in our community? Do we want to help love our neighbors? Do we want to help with the two organizations that we help on a weekly basis? The only way that we will get out of these chairs and we will go do it is if we pray. When we see a bad situation and we say, God, what do you want me to do? And we pray that over and over and over again. So when we actually come across a situation that sucks, we do what God would want us to do. We would do what Jesus would do in that moment. But the only way that will happen is if you do the great work of prayer. God, as we, and you welcome us into your work. As we take the example of what Jesus does, and he brings people along with them just to show them the power of what prayer can do. God, I pray that we aren't the ones that are sleeping. I'm praying that we're not the ones that are distracted or trying to escape from the bad situations, but we just look at what the world is doing in the bad situations, and we don't just point fingers and all the boring stuff. No, we say, God, what do you want us to do? God, make our heart like yours. Make our mind like yours. Make us and help us be the hands and feet of not what we want to do, but we do what you command us to do. God, direct us so whenever something bad is happening in the world, we immediately act like Christ. God, we know and we have seen so many different people that when something bad happens in front of them, we see the ones that have prayed because they jump into action. And we have seen the ones that have not prayed because they sit back and they watch it. God, I pray that our church, Elevate Christian Church, is the ones that jump up. And they bring heaven into different situations. They bring heaven into people's lives. God, whatever's going on in our hearts, if we are frustrated, if we are angry, if we're tempted to do anything else, I pray that we do the great work of prayer so that we do not fall into temptation, which is nothing, but we live by the Spirit to make a ginormous impact in people's lives. God, you are so good, and we ask this all in your Son's name. Amen.